All right, we are recording. Welcome everybody to the 24th. And I looked ahead to make sure I knew what number this was so I wouldn't mess up. The 24th episode of Dear Dr. Fantasy, and I am joined by a wonderful person, someone I've very much been looking forward to chatting one-on-one with, and that is Matt from Matt on Books. Hello, Matt. How are you?
I'm pretty good. I have a request.
A request. Okay, a request.
Yeah, can you from now on, or maybe just for this episode, can you call it Dear Herr Dr. Professor Fantasy?
Man, that's a long title, man.
Little tiny type in your thumbnail.
Yeah.
You can break it across 2 or 3 lines if you need to. So
I kind of like the sound of that. I know you live over there in Germany, and I have lived in Germany myself before, so I like that title a lot, actually. Yeah.
Herr Professor Dr. Fantasy.
You
need much longer business cards in Germany.
I would imagine, yes.
They're folding.
They're probably, you have to fold them, and
yeah.
Okay, they're 8 by 11 business cards. Yeah. So it is wonderful to have you here, Matt, and I am so looking forward. Yeah, it's a pleasure. And I was on your channel once already. We had the fantastic time talking with it wasn't just me and you. We had a great time with Josh and with the Nemesis, and it was a great chat, actually. So
it was.
Yeah,
I really enjoyed it. I've got to say though, your Nemesis actually beat you to it. He was the very first online chat I did with any other booktuber. So
well, he's always trying to undermine me that way. So I'm sure that was his sole motive.
I'm pretty sure it was. I can't imagine why he wanted to talk to me. I think he just wanted to make sure that he was getting all the new booktubers before you were.
Yeah. Well, he's got some catching up to do in that respect, though. So,
that's true. True.
So, but that also was a really cool conversation. I know you were focusing on the TV series there, and your responses to it, and that was a whole interesting time for sure. And now that that's over, I guess things have calmed down a little bit, maybe. But
fantasy TV has certainly calmed down all of a sudden. It's like
now everybody's upset about The Witcher, right?
House of the Dragon's over, Rings of Power is over, and now everyone's just pissed off about Henry Cavill.
Yes, there's a big brouhaha about that, which I have not watched The Witcher yet, so I'm not really in this one way or another. I think seems like a nice guy, Henry Cavill.
I mean, the cool thing, the thing I really like about him is he's just as big a nerd as any of us.
Yeah.
He's like totally into all this stuff. He paints Warhammer minis, and he's a total nerd, which is very, very cool.
Very
having
cool.
this huge, good-looking beefcake actor, and he's a total nerd.
Yeah. No, that is awesome. And I don't know why I mean, we don't have to really get into it. I have no idea.
I don't think anyone can get into it. I think anyone saying that they know that he left because is just making huge assumptions based on no information.
Yeah. So I have no statements whatsoever on the matter.
No, I don't either. I thought he was good, so I think it's kind of a pity, but we'll see how the next actor is,
And that's the thing. I think a lot of times what happens is, and I think AP actually, speaking of the Nemesis, addressed this in a video.
Yeah, I saw that.
A lot of times we get used to a certain actor in a certain role, and it's inconceivable that someone else could play that, but yet look at all the Batmans we've had, and some better than others. And certainly I think you could argue that some of the later Batmans were better than some of the earlier ones, right? So I think it's, hey, I grew up on the Adam West Batman, like, bam, pow, that one, so,
Yeah, and before the Witcher series started, all of the fans of the game and the books were outraged that Henry Cavill was going to play.
Of course.
Yeah, because like from the game anyway, he's kind of leaner. He's not quite as huge and chunky. He's not Superman. Yeah. And Henry Cavill is Superman.
He is. Yeah. That's actually what I think of him as more.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
But he did a great job. I thought he did an awesome job, and we'll see how the next guy is.
Yeah.
I
I haven't watched the show
Rookie.
yet. I've read the first two the two short story collections.
The short stories are good. The novels are,
yeah, I hear mixed. I hear, you know, some of my viewers are really big fans of the novels, and then I hear fairly often people will say, yeah, the first couple novels I like, but then something went off the rails. So there's a fairly mixed opinion about the novels. Universally, though, what I hear praise for is the video game, the
third one anyway.
Yeah, the third one, Witcher 3.
There have been 3. Witcher 3, I played all the way through twice, and it's really, really good. It's sort of set the bar for role-playing video games for me now.
It's actually the one modern video game that I have played, and I played it for approximately like an hour.
Okay.
When a former student of mine, a fellow who took a few classes with me, including the fantasy novels course that I teach, attempted to teach me how to play Witcher 3. So there is a video of this on my channel. It's a fairly old video, but
I'll have to look that up.
It's pretty comedic, actually. But the cool part is he actually was teaching me about storytelling in video games. And that was really cool because that's something I didn't know a whole lot about. The last video game I played was maybe Pac-Man or something, and pretty not in touch with the video game world really at all. And that's by design, because I know that if I did play video games, I would be addicted to them. So I avoid them. So I wasn't aware of just how much storytelling is involved in a lot of modern video games. And so he really gave me a nice education there, and then attempted to teach me how to play Witcher 3. It is pretty comedic, actually. It took me forever to figure out the buttons and all of that. And by the time we were done, though, I feel like I was pretty good at walking in a straight line.
That's a good place to start.
Yeah. So
two of my close friends are actually narrative designers for video games.
Oh, wow.
Which basically means they're authors, but of course, writing for a video game is very different than writing a story, just a story, because it has to interact with the locations, and it has to interact with objects and other characters in the game and stuff like that. So it's a very particular, they call it narrative design usually. They don't call them writers necessarily.
Okay. I would call them writers, but whatever.
Yeah, I mean, they are writers, but there is a totally different kind of thinking that needs to go into it, which is much more like design.
Yeah.
Like, how do I expose which parts of my narrative based on other characters that the player could interact with, or an object that they could pick up, or a place that they could go to, or whatever. So,
and there's a bit of
you don't know exactly what the player is going to do.
Right. So there has to be a kind of a choose your own adventure element to this kind of storytelling, right?
Totally. Yeah.
Yeah. Interesting. Yeah. And that is a realm you have, I guess, familiarity with in your line of business, because you're knowledgeable about computers and graphic design and stuff like that, right?
Yeah, I design digital products basically, and I've been doing more or less that. I mean, depends on who you're talking to. I've found that I design digital products as the thing that the most people can sort of imagine.
I'm like nodding like I know what that is. I'm like, oh yeah, cool.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Whereas if I say I'm a user experience designer, which is more technically correct, a lot of people are like, I don't know what that means. So,
I mean, it sounds intriguing. User experience designer. Yeah.
It's basically just a fancy word, which is intended to early digital design was very much focused on what things look like.
Okay.
Right. Which is a little stupid, because you're not designing a poster or a book cover. You're designing an interactive thing where people can do things and something happens, and then they can do something else and something else happens. Right. So you're not just looking at how a button looks, what color it is, but how does it interact when somebody rolls over it, when somebody clicks it, where does it send you? How is the transition to get there? And all of these kinds of things. and you want the user to have a good experience, and most software is a pretty bad experience, honestly.
Yeah,
So
that's fair to say. Yeah.
Yeah. And I'm really, when I'm working, I'm basically, I'm trying to help people like you.
Yeah.
Right? People who are not super up on all of the technology and
Wait, I feel like you just called me a dummy.
I'm just reflecting back what you said to me before we started.
No, I'm totally giving you a hard time.
I have absolutely no doubt that you are anything but a dummy. But
oh no, I am a dummy. I am a dummy in many realms. In many realms, I am a dummy. So, and I will be the first to own up to that fact.
Yeah.
So yeah.
So yeah, I'm generally designing for people like you who don't necessarily want to think long and deep about why the software works the way it does, or where to find the right thing. I just want it to be easy and intuitive and that kind of thing.
Very cool. That's an important job, actually, these days.
It's I've never been unemployed, put it that way.
I believe it. I believe it.
I mean, except when I wanted to be. There's plenty of demand.
Is that also key to how much you've traveled? The fact that this is your profession, you could probably live anywhere you want in the world, I would guess.
It's made traveling a lot easier, but it's not the reason I've been traveling. I've moved to different countries because of a woman. I've moved to different countries because I had friends there, or because I didn't want to be in the country I was in, or whatever. I don't think I've ever really moved for a job.
But once you move, you can just like
I can find jobs pretty easily. Yeah.
Wow. That would not be true for me. That's for sure.
You're quite a specialist. Although, I mean, English-speaking countries all have universities, so I imagine you could get a job in any English-speaking country.
Well, I don't know if that's true, because academia is in a bit of turmoil, and there are way more PhDs than there are jobs. So whereas in your field, there probably are more positions and fewer qualified people, I would guess.
Yeah, generally. Yeah. Education hasn't really caught up. There are a lot of, I've actually done a fair bit of hiring of more junior designers. And my impression was that there are a lot of not very good courses that are promising people that they can just go out and be good designers. And then they come to a designer with some experience who might want to hire them, and you look at what they've done and you're like, you haven't really done anything, have you? You don't really, I don't think I can hire you, you know? And I feel really sorry for these people, because they've been told that they can take like a 2-year course and they're a designer, you know, and they're just not qualified even for junior positions, a lot of them.
Yeah. So some experience is necessary, I guess.
Yeah. Or better courses, you know. I mean, a proper degree. Like, there are universities that are doing good courses, proper full-on bachelors, where you come out and you've got a good design education.
Okay, this is interesting, because I do know some people who do programming and other things, and the ones that I know who are really doing well with it do have a bachelor's degree in the field. But you always hear, oh yeah, there's these 6-month certificates and you can get a good job at the end of them and blah, blah, blah. So you think there's a bit of a scam going on there?
I mean, I think there's a part of the industry that uses those people because they're cheap.
Yeah.
You know, so like if you're working in a very professional design studio or in a company doing design, you're not going to hire those people because they're too much work. It's too much work to get them up to the level where they're doing good work. But if you're working in a startup where you don't necessarily worry about quality, you're just worrying about getting something done and whatever.
Labor. Yeah.
And you need cheap people, and they're young, so they don't know that you're taking advantage of them. Then you hire some young people and you don't pay them anything. Yeah.
Interesting. Well, that sounds like academia too. Frankly, I guess there are a lot of fields where that sort of thing goes on. I mean, an even bigger scandal is the whole adjunct world in academia. People, working part-time positions cobbled together here and there and everywhere and getting paid peanuts for it. So yeah, these things go on everywhere, I suppose.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah, it's too bad.
Of course.
Yeah. But
anyway, that's not what we're here to talk about, is it?
No, we're here to talk about books. We're here to talk about, well, I mean, whatever comes up is great, but
sure.
I do feel like your background does give you some interesting insights into this realm, BookTube, and YouTube in general. Probably you understand some things that most of us don't, as a person with that sort of background. I don't know if you feel like it gives you any advantages or not, but I'm sure it helps you if you ever, you could make really awesome thumbnails and that sort of thing if you wanted to put time into that, right?
Yeah, I mean, I have done some video production in the past. That was sort of a volunteer job, but we did some pretty ambitious videos. It's been a while, but I shot, I cut and did everything on the videos. And that meant that the learning curve, like producing videos for YouTube, I was like, that's not that big a deal.
Yeah.
It's
for me, easy. It was a huge learning curve. If you look at the first video, you can see that. Hopefully they're better now.
I think I kind of know what your setup is, and considering how simple all your setup is, I think your videos look great.
Yeah. That's my big secret is that most of my videos are shot with this. And the discussion videos, I just use a computer. And I don't have, like, you have a nice mic there. I don't even have that. I just using the mic on the Mac that I have here in front of me. And I mean, I keep it really simple because I'm a simple man. So
I had the at least a bit of knowledge, and I had some equipment, and I knew what other equipment I needed, and I had some money. So I pretty quickly just said, I want good sound, I want good video, I want okay lighting. So I just got the stuff I needed.
Yeah.
And I set it up. I mean, you've lived in Germany. I live in a flat in Germany. Like, for anyone living in the US, it's probably hard to imagine. My whole flat looks like it's about as big as the room you're sitting in. It's actually probably bigger, but it's 90 square meters. So I don't have anywhere I can just set up a studio.
Right.
I have to pack all my stuff away and pull it out, put it up, and set everything up every time I want to do a video. So
I actually do that too. I didn't buy any fancy lighting. I just use house lamps to increase the lighting and that sort of thing. So, and
it looks fine.
Yeah.
And I mean, there was a discussion recently on Twitter. I forget who it was that started it, but AP also chimed in. Like, if your content sucks, it doesn't matter,
right,
how good your microphone or your lights are,
right.
And if your content's awesome, then shoot it on your phone and it's fine. Like your production's nothing special, but your content's always really, really nice. So, and there's always interesting things to think about every time I watch one of your videos. So
well,
that's the main thing.
Got to be good at something. So, and I've learned along the way too. I went from zero knowledge about making videos. I literally asked my students about how to make a video when I started the channel, and they told me you could use an iPhone, but you would need to be at least an 11. And at the time, my wife had an 11, so I was like, yes, so
just I was scraped
good to go. It's scraped by. So but it's been fun, and I particularly enjoyed learning how to make thumbnails. And I use a couple free apps to do that. So I use Fonto and Eraser, and that's good enough. I don't have Photoshop. Sure. Anything like that. So I know if I got Photoshop, it would be a fun toy, I'm sure. Have you used Photoshop?
I've been using Photoshop since pretty much daily since 1993.
Wow. Okay.
Or 92. It's been part of my work
Yeah.
for many years. So I know all sorts of tricks in Photoshop. I think for someone like you, Photoshop would be way too much.
Yeah. Yeah.
Like there's really no point, because it's got a million tools that you would never use, and it would be very confusing to start with.
Right.
Because it's a complex professional tool. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. I don't need that. I mean, the
No.
2 apps that I named have pretty much everything I need. So
Yeah. And I think there is a non-professional charm to your thumbnails.
Yes, that's a very nice, diplomatically put. I like that a lot. I remember when there was one thumbnail that you commented on. It was for episode 7 of Rings of Power, where I had the Nemesis as the Balrog. And I think you said something to the effect that this is the best awful thumbnail ever.
Yeah, I mean, so some of your thumbnails are just classic. Even though,
yeah,
I mean, when I look at them, I'm like, okay, with Photoshop you could have done this, and like, but they still have a real charm to them. So
yes, that was the point. That was quite deliberate, right? So.
Obviously. Obviously, it's like that whole area of art called naive.
Yes.
Art.
Yes.
It's exactly that. It's very consciously.
Basically like a chimpanzee scribbling on a piece of paper, and it's like, wow, I'm the equivalent of that and thumbnail making.
Yeah. But I mean, if you get enough chimps scribbling on enough pieces of paper,
yeah, you might have a masterpiece.
Exactly.
So anyway, so let's talk about books, because we've been skirting around the books, and I think it's time to ask you the question, which is, of course, going on the premise that you are what you read. Please tell my audience about some of the formative reads for you during your life. We can start with little Matt and work our way toward the present. But what have been some of the most important stories for you in your life and your reading journey?
I was thinking about this because, of course, I've seen these a couple of times, and I know the questions you ask. The first, I know it's not the first books I ever read, but the first books I ever read that were more adult books, and that were that have stayed in my memory, is when I was 9 years old. My mother gave me the Silver Jubilee box set of The Hobbit and The Lord of the Rings.
Oh, yeah.
For my birthday. And I remember those exactly, like they are burned, like the covers and everything are just burned into my memory. Yeah. The Lord of the Rings was red, green, and blue, although I think it was actually blue, green, and red in order. And the Hobbit was gold, or very like a warm yellow. And they had art from the brothers Hildebrandt.
Okay.
Nobody knows them anymore, but they did covers for everything in the 60s, 70s, and 80s. And I read those and immediately reread them. I think before that I had read Narnia and a couple of other things, but they didn't stick with me quite as much. Yeah. Probably because my brain was still squishy. And one of my formative memories about books also is my mother was a big Stephen King fan. And there was a shelf with a whole bunch of Stephen King books on it, and she told me not to read them. I mean,
that's okay then.
At my age, and she described how scary they were and everything, and I was like, yeah, okay. And I for decades, I had this really kind of negative, avoid Stephen King kind of attitude.
Oh, so it worked too well.
Yeah, it maybe worked too well. And I remember just thinking, yeah, those books sound kind of horrible. And I read Lord of the Rings. I immediately reread it. And then I just jumped into sci-fi and fantasy. I read Dune, I think even before I was a teenager. All of the books, the first 4. Of course, struggled with God Emperor quite a lot
Uh-huh.
at that age. But what else did I read? I read the Chronicles of Thomas Covenant
Uh-huh.
when I was around that age as well.
Wow. Wow.
The Belgariad, yeah, all of the fantasy that I could get my hands on back then.
Okay.
Chronicles of Ember was also very formative for me. Zelazny, I've read that the whole thing 3 times, I think.
Wow.
And I have a thing about rereading books that I really like. So I've read Lord of the Rings somewhere over 10 times.
Yeah.
I've kind of lost count. Dune 4 or 5 times. Thomas Covenant, I'm thinking about rereading next year for the 3rd time.
Yeah, I'd like to get back into that myself at some point. I've only read Lord Fowl's Bane, and I'd like to get the series under my belt at some point.
It's the first book is very set up. You know, like the really interesting things start happening more in the 2nd and 3rd book.
Okay. I also feel like I would get a lot more out of it now than I did when I was a teenager when I read it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then, I mean, in university, of course, there was a lot of, you need to read classics. And some of the stuff that stuck with me was Faulkner and Hemingway.
Oh, yeah.
Both of them, both very different, but The Sound and the Fury is like forever in my head. It was such, it just like really sunk in. And then I had a weird mental thing going on after university. I think I decided that I was an adult now and fantasy and science fiction isn't adult.
Yeah.
And I started reading, I don't know, more literary stuff, you know, more acceptable adult kind
respectable.
Yeah. Exactly, respectable. And I became a huge fan of Paul Auster, for example. Contemporary fiction, I read a fair bit of Gabriel Garcia Marquez.
Which is really fantasy.
Which is totally fantasy. And a lot of Paul Auster actually is too.
Yeah.
I mean, not all of Auster's books, but kind of half of his books are magical realism, technically. Okay. Yeah, there is definitely some weird shit going on that doesn't make sense.
So even when you were being respectable, you were still dabbling in fantasy.
I was still leaning in an imaginative direction. Yeah, let's put it that way. Haruki Murakami. Also, like, I was such a fan of Paul Auster at the time. I read everything he'd written, and then I was like, there isn't any more. What's kind of like Paul Auster? And somebody recommended Haruki Murakami. And I read everything Murakami had written at that time.
Wow.
There's a number of books since then that I haven't gotten to, but yeah, and I had maybe a decade of reading where I just wasn't reading straight up fantasy or
genre fiction.
Yeah, exactly. It was all much more sort of contemporary literature, or literary fiction, or whatever you call it.
Fantasy dressed respectably.
Exactly. Fantasy in a tweed jacket. Exactly. Just like Dr. Fantasy.
Herr Dr. Professor.
Herr Professor Doctor.
Yeah.
Fantasy. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah, and then I started getting back into it. I mean, what's also been a real influential thing in my life is that I've moved a lot and like really moved, like from America to Australia or Australia to Germany or that kind of thing. So for a long time, I didn't keep books, like physical books, because anything you've got in a shelf when you move, you have to carry
it. Yeah.
So I just,
I know moving books is a pain. It's a huge pain.
Books are the worst things. I mean, unless you own a set of weights, books are the worst thing to move.
I will say though that I have moved so many times as well, and I have a ton of books. And for some reason or other, and when we lived in apartments, we were always on the 3rd story. We were always on the 3rd floor. So it's like lots of flights of stairs carrying boxes of books. And at the time, I knew a guy. I had help from friends always moving because I couldn't afford, I was a graduate student, whatever. I couldn't afford movers. So just a bunch of friends. And I had one friend who was a marathon runner along with me. We used to run marathons. And I had another friend who was a weightlifter, big guy, very strong.
Good friends when you're moving.
But guess who who wimped out after like a couple flights of stairs, and guess who was going like no problem up and down the stairs?
Well, marathons are about endurance.
Yeah. So my marathon friend and I were like up and down, up and down. The weightlifter guy was like after like 1 or 2 trips. So,
Yeah, he could probably stand still on the spot and stack 3 boxes of books and pick them up. And put them down
he could lift at one time way more than us skinny guys. But doing it up again and again and again, up and down, it wasn't even close.
Yeah, I've reached an age, and I earn enough that I do not lift things like that anymore. And most of my friends are a similar age. I'm slightly older than you, so I don't have any friends where if I say, "Hey, I'll buy a bunch of beer and pizza and you can help me move," that they're all like,
this is a back.
I'm kind of busy on that weekend. I think I've just decided I'm going out of town, and yeah, it's like I get professional movers to do that stuff. Yeah, and that's amazing to watch. This time I just moved into this flat in January. And I had little tiny, I think they were Kurdish guys, and they were like, one of them would stack boxes on the other guy's back, and they just run up the stairs.
Yeah,
they did the whole thing, across town move, everything out, everything in like 2.5 hours.
Wow,
it was amazing.
Wow.
But now what I was getting to is
yes, back to your story.
For a very long time, I just bought Kindle books.
Yeah.
And
makes sense.
Yeah, exactly. Because I was not only moving a lot, I was traveling a lot. And I would be out of the country almost every month.
So what you're saying is we should not expect an unboxing video on your channel anytime soon.
No, I'm saying the exact opposite, because I've moved into a flat that I plan on staying in.
Okay.
And I'm looking over the monitor at my brand new giant bookshelf that goes up to the ceiling that I had a carpenter install just recently.
Cool.
And a lot of the books on it are books I read years ago, but I didn't own. Right. And I'm getting into the physical greed of books now.
Yes, that's the main driver of BookTube.
I want,
Yeah.
So yeah, I'm buying nicer editions and that kind of thing.
So you succumbed to the allure of beautiful editions of books and stuff.
Some, the important ones. Like I did a video recently about the 5 or 6 editions of Lord of the Rings that I own.
Yeah.
And some of them are just paperbacks and nothing super special. And some of them are like a 100th year anniversary, blah, blah, blah. I don't know what, they're very, very fancy, sexy
with beautiful
editions.
Illustrations. And
Exactly.
Yeah, nice.
My favorite is the one with Alan Lee. It's the all 3-in-1 book edition with Alan Lee's illustrations. He's my head production designer for Lord of the Rings.
Well, they did consult him. Peter Jackson did.
No, I know. Yeah. But it still looked a lot more cartoony than Alan Lee.
Yeah.
But yeah, a lot of the design of a lot of things like Orthanc and whatever, like you look at it and you're like, yeah, that's Alan Lee designed that.
Yep.
It's very much straight out of his illustrations.
Yep.
It's been a weird sort of back and forth in and out of genre fiction.
Yeah. I'm curious if were there specific books that brought you back into genre fiction? Is there like, oh, I have discovered that this is both enjoyable and respectable and awesome, and I'm going to be a fantasy reader again?
I don't think anything. I think the respectable part of that was just me going, I don't really care. Like who is it that's judging this, like
right.
I'm judging it. So if I just let that go and just read what I want to read, then everything's cool. I think one of the things that made me really get back into it was the Game of Thrones TV series.
Okay, cool. Yeah.
Because I had read, this is also the suffering that you maybe also share, being our age.
Yeah.
I read the first book of A Song of Ice and Fire when it came out.
Mm-hmm.
And the second one didn't come out for a while. So when the second one came out, I reread the first one and I read the second one, but there were only two. And then the third one came out, and it's like, and I don't have a very good memory, honestly, for books.
Okay.
So I always end up going back and rereading. I've probably read the first book of the Farseer trilogy like 5 times.
Oh, wow. To get ready for the next,
Exactly, but I haven't read Fitz and the Fool.
Oh.
At all, right? Yeah. And I want to reread all of Realm of the Elderlings maybe next year. But the when Game of Thrones started, I was like, oh, wait a sec. This is those books I read years ago.
Yeah.
And I held myself back from watching it, and I read all of the books again. And then I watched it, and then the fourth book at some point came out, and I read that and whatever. Yeah. And I think that kind of drew me back into fantasy much more.
Cool.
And then I started reading all sorts of stuff. I used to read a lot more science fiction than I do now.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
A ton of science fiction for a while, but it's mostly fantasy now.
Yeah, I have only ever kind of dabbled in science fiction myself. I like it. I prefer fantasy overall. So I gravitate toward fantasy.
I think when I was a teenager, I was more excited about the future.
Yeah.
And now I work in technology. So I know too much about how the future is made.
Oh. I think a lot of great authors ignore the distinction too. I was just talking about Mark Lawrence, and he's one he has a science background, and he routinely just sort of mushes the two together, fantasy, science fiction, whatever, and then Stephen King's Dark Tower series, very similar. And not just fantasy and science fiction, but also horror and Western and all kinds of other stuff, and just thrown in there. But then of course you have your pure like epic fantasy, and you have very, very pure science fiction, very idea driven, future oriented, etc. So I guess.
I mean, most of the science fiction I've read, I would say, is really science fiction.
Okay. It's not fantasy disguised as science fiction.
What's the
like Star Wars and Dune and
totally. I mean, I keep thinking about it. On the one hand, I don't really care about categories and their definitions at all. But on the other hand, I keep going, what is actually fantasy or science fiction? And the thing I keep thinking is fantasy is when a person can influence the world through their own will outside of the laws of physics.
Mm-hmm.
And
so there's magic involved.
Basically, yeah. Okay. But I mean, if you just say there's magic, then what is magic? You still got kind of a question. Yeah. Whereas science fiction to me is when technology is the primary thing, and the world follows the laws of physics, or at least is saying that it follows future laws of physics that we may not understand yet,
Okay. Yeah.
So Dune to me is definitely science fantasy, because like the Bene Gesserit and the Mentats and all of that, I mean, that's basically magic.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. They're doing it. Star Wars, the Force is totally magic.
It's magic. They
It's
tried
not technology.
the midichlorians or
Oh,
whatever.
fuck off with the midichlorians.
Yeah.
Oh God. As soon as Qui-Gon said that, I was like, no, what are you doing?
Yeah, that was a bad moment.
You don't explain the magic.
Franchise. Yeah. No, it was definitely a mood killer for a lot of us. Yeah.
So that's sort of how I draw the line. I think, okay, it's more coming from inside a person, not necessarily following the laws of physics, or it is following the laws of physics.
Yeah. And ultimately, it's what, a cool story is what we're after here, right?
Yeah. In the end, like I said, I don't really care.
Yeah.
Like if it's really cool and it's not clear what category it belongs to, it's still really cool.
Yeah, absolutely.
Well,
other series. So back to your reading journey, because I know there are some big ones that you haven't mentioned yet. And I can think of one particular one, which is how actually I think you and I first started talking together was really because of one particular series. And you know what I'm talking about.
I'm guessing what you mean is the Malazan Book of the Fallen.
Oh, yeah.
Malazan was weird.
Where'd that come in? Yeah.
I'm actually relatively new to it. I picked up Gardens of the Moon, I think actually when it came out.
Oh, wow. Okay.
So a long time ago.
Yeah.
Which doesn't sound like I'm new to it, but I DNF'd it. I totally was not into it. It didn't, I'm trying to think what else I was reading at the time, but it just didn't fit. I read something fantasy and then I tried Gardens of the Moon and I was like, whoa, this is nothing like that. And it's nothing like the thing I want to read next. And it just, I don't get it. Yeah.
Right.
And
very common response. Yeah.
Totally. And I put it down and I think I forgot that I had tried it. And I tried it again like 10 years later. And I was like, oh yeah, I remember I DNF'd this and I DNF'd it again. Yeah. I was just like, I don't know. I feel confused and it feels like work. And it was probably also a lot more me than it was the book. It was just, I wasn't in the right mood at the time. It wasn't what I wanted. And then the pandemic happened. And 2020 was the worst year of my life.
Yeah.
Aside
from the pandemic, you mean? Yeah.
Also aside from the pandemic, I mean, the pandemic had just started. Right after that, I lost my job. And right after that, the lady I'd been together with and was living with for 4 years disappeared.
Hopefully not the one that you moved to a different country for.
No, actually, she moved to Germany for me. So
okay.
She got to go home.
Okay.
which was good for her in the end. So it was all good. But at the time, it was just like one thing after another, extremely unexpectedly got fired. Extremely unexpectedly, I'm suddenly single and I can't go out and do things with my friends because pandemic, it was a horrible year. And again, I had forgotten that I had tried reading Gardens of the Moon. And well, no, I didn't forget that time because I still had it on my shelf. I did. Oh,
you still had the book. Okay.
I still had the paperback and I could see, because I'm not anal about being very, very careful with my books. I could see how far I'd read because the spine was cracked like about a third in and then 2/3 wasn't. And I was like, it's pandemic. I'm unemployed. I'm single. I've got nothing else to do. I can't go out anyway.
So in sheer desperation.
I'm just going to read this damn book. And I sat down and I had the same feelings at the beginning. I had the same feelings about it for a while. And then I got about halfway through and I was like, this is actually kind of interesting. And I think I started to realize what he was doing that a lot of fantasy authors don't do.
Right.
And I thought it was very interesting.
Yep.
And then I got about 3/4 of the way through and I was like, damn, I'm in trouble now because I'm going to finish this in the next couple of days and I don't have the rest. And I went on Amazon. I ordered all 9 of the rest of Malazan or Malazan Book of the Fallen.
That's commitment right there. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I was like, I'm into this enough I think I'm going to do this. And I read all of them in about 2.5 months.
Oh my God. Wow.
Yeah. Because I was literally, like I said, I couldn't go out and do anything with other people.
Wow.
I didn't have a job and I was single.
That might be a record. I don't know for sure, but 2.5 months for the entire Malazan Book of the Fallen might, although I don't know, do we count the 2 times you DNF'd it? Because that makes it 30 years or something.
That makes it like 25 years. Yeah. We probably should count those. I mean, it took me 25 years to read Gardens of the Moon.
Yeah.
It took me 2.5 months to read the rest.
Wow, that is cool. Yeah. So what is it you think you realized on the third time's the charm, I guess, but what is it that you realized?
I mean, I think for me personally, and I've thought about this a lot, and a lot of it can sound really patronizing maybe to people that read other things or people who are younger than me. But I think for me personally, it was my age that made it possible, because maybe my age, and also that I'd read a lot already, because I'd seen a lot of different things that a lot of different people were doing with fantasy. And fantasy tends to be, I mean, there are many exceptions, but it tends to be a genre with a lot of hand-holding.
It does tend to be, yeah.
And
I think a lot of patterns and tropes and expectations about the way the story will work, right?
Yeah, exactly. And a lot of exposition that can be more or less clumsily done and that kind of thing.
Right.
And
partly because it is a genre where you have to do a lot of world building, because this is a place, and so they're trying to work in, and there are lots of ways to do this badly, and we do see it, just like dialogue between 2 characters who are saying stuff that they already know, but somehow the author wants the reader to know this information about the world. So, oh, that castle has been haunted for 20 years now. Oh yes, the dark magic that has a hold over it is related to the evil lord who has, that sort of thing. So, I mean,
there's a reason that just got off the boat is a trope, and wise old one is a trope. I mean, and of course there is a lot, because everything is new. Like, it is a world we don't know. You do have to explain a lot somehow. And
there's a good way to do it, which is hard actually, and then there are lots of less good ways to do it.
Yeah, exactly. And I mean, I guess I'd seen some good ways to do it, and I'd seen some less good ways to do it. But the thing that really struck me with Erickson's writing is I felt like he just trusted my intelligence. He very rarely, basically almost never, just dumps exposition on you. There's always, I found myself stopping and thinking a lot more when reading Malazan than I did with almost any other fantasy books I've ever read. Like, what does this mean? And things where I was like, that seems like foreshadowing, or that seems maybe symbolic of something, but I'm not sure at first glance what. And I found myself flipping back and forth a fair bit as well, especially the damn prologues. Like, the prologues always kick my ass. I hate prologues in fantasy books, and they are the almost the most consistent element of fantasy books is that they have prologues.
Well, and then of course the Nemesis has all these prologue videos. So.
Yeah, exactly. And I refuse to watch them. He can go to hell with his prologue. No, I'm joking. No, the thing that always gets me about a prologue is it feels disconnected. Most prologues feel completely disconnected, because usually in fantasy it's very common the prologue is set 1,000 years earlier, or it's got completely different characters that are not in the story you're about to read. And then you start reading, and maybe you get like 3/4 of the way through and you're like, I vaguely remember something from the prologue, and maybe this is connected. And I always feel like I have to go back and read the prologue, and that irritates me. It feels a little bit like an authorial crutch.
Well, I mean, it certainly can be. I think the purpose, though, of a prologue is a bit like an epigraph, which is to signal to the reader, this is what this book is about. This is these are things to pay attention to, and a good author can use. Again, it's a tool. It's just a tool.
Yeah.
So a prologue used well is going to signal, here are some important themes. Here are things to look out for. There might be some foreshadowing there, that sort of thing. And Erickson is definitely doing all those things in his prologues, and sometimes, giving you a sense of the direction and what you should be looking for, and sometimes doing a little fake out on you even, that's all part of the fun, I think. But
yeah, absolutely. I mean, I'm rereading it now. I'm actually
the Malazan Book of the Fallen.
Yeah, I'm actually on House of Chains right at the moment.
Okay. Witness.
Yeah, it's interesting. Also, I've only just recently started listening to audiobooks. I tried like 10 years ago, and it just didn't click. Maybe it was the wrong narrator, the wrong book.
Oh, it just doesn't work for me. I've tried.
I listened to Peter McLean's Priest of Bones.
Okay.
And the narrator, that was the first one I listened to recently, and the narrator is John Lees, and it was so good. Oh man, I was wrapped up in it. And then I listened to Andy Serkis doing The Hobbit, which of course is a reread, so it's very easy.
That's what I tried. I tried Andy Serkis reading Fellowship of the Ring.
Okay.
And I love Andy Serkis. He's tremendously talented. Yeah. And I love Fellowship of the Ring. So I thought, okay, this should be an easy one for me. It should. And I'm just like, it doesn't work for me. I want to constantly rewind it, which is not as easy as flipping back or just pausing on a passage. I am not very good at it at all. Okay. So, and then maybe it's just lack of practice, but I thought it would be easier. I thought this would be, an easy thing to do to get into audiobooks, but it was more effort for me than reading a book for some reason. So,
okay. I maybe it's also my particular situation. I started a job recently. I was unemployed for a couple months, or just between jobs, and I started a job, and I live in Berlin. So if you're lucky, you can walk to work, and if you're unlucky, you have an hour and a half in the U-Bahn every day, like I do.
Oh no.
So yeah, it's like 45, 50 minutes there, and then 45 minutes home. So
reading time.
Yeah, exactly. And it's often in a big city, you cannot sit down in the train. You can't guarantee that you're going to get a seat anywhere. Yeah. So I was like, okay, instead of taking a physical book with me, which is clumsy when you're standing, I'll try out some audiobooks.
Smart.
And it's been going really well. And I've been mixing with House of Chains. I've been mixing it because I've got a Scribd subscription, which is like $10 a month, and you get everything they have.
Cool.
It's not like Audible where you have to buy a
pay
book
for each book that you
get. Basically you get 1 credit a month, but I mean, how many books a month can you read? Like, especially with audiobooks, it could be a lot. So
yeah,
Scribd has got the entire Malazan Book of the Fallen. So
wow.
I just grabbed that. I'm rereading it, so I knew it wouldn't be too difficult. And then I switch back and forth. When I get home, I read, and when I go to work, I listen. So and rereading Malazan has been such an interesting experience because I enjoyed it the first time. I thought I got a lot, but then I'm rereading it and I'm like, I did get a lot, but I'm getting a lot more now.
Yep, I can relate.
A lot more. Wow. Yep. I mean, it's daunting. It's not a way to recommend a book to anyone, is to say, oh, it's so good when you reread the 3 million plus words.
It's not the best sales pitch, but
no.
But the fact of the matter is, like you said earlier, you get a ton out of it the first time. And I finished the series on my own with no one to talk to about it before I knew anything about BookTube. And the first thing I thought when I finished, I thought two things. One, this is mind-blowingly good. Two, I have to reread this, right away. Those are the two things I said to myself. And the reread, as you said, I mean, so that sounds like I got a lot out of it, and I definitely did. But the reread showed me just that much more. And that's a serious, I mean, that's some bang for your buck there. If you can reread a book several times and get something new out of it each time, that's fantastic. And that tells you that this is a story that has some meat to it, some depth, that there's a lot that if you can reread it and not just enjoy the experience each time, but pick up new things, and maybe even according to what phase of life you're in, relating to it in a slightly different way. That tells you that this is a series that has just tons of literary value and lots of room for analysis and exploration and that sort of thing. So that to me is one of the biggest selling points, really.
That's the highest praise that I can give a book is I intend to reread this.
Right.
Yeah. Or I have reread it multiple times or whatever. Right. Like I did a TBRR, to be reread video recently where I just went through stuff I want to reread, and I started thinking about it, and like Joanna's got the Song of Ice and Fire reread along coming up in January. I'm going to join that. And then I was thinking about it, and when I look at my shelf, especially because I've been buying books that I've already read just because I want to have them on my shelf, I've been thinking, man, maybe next year is the year of the reread for me. It's hard to decide that though, because FOMO is a thing. I keep looking around, like everybody's making videos about something that just came out or is only a couple of years old or whatever, and I'm like, yeah, that sounds really good. I'd like to read that, but
right.
Yeah, we'll see. I mean, I've certainly got my reread plan anyway, because I'm doing all of the Malazan books. Some are reread, some are read for the first time. Like most of Esslemont
stuff. Yeah,
that's a read. I've only read Knight of Knives.
Okay.
So all of that stuff is first time for me. And I think I'm just looking at it now. I think I've bought all of it. Like I've got 1.5 meters of Malazan books.
That sounds about right.
Yeah. I'm pretty sure that I've bought all of the.
You got Novels of the Malazan Empire.
Exactly.
You've got Paths to Ascendancy.
What there is of it. Yeah.
3 books out so far. Yeah. You've got.
Path to Ascendancy I've got. And then I've got Carcanus, the 2 books that are out. And the
Bulkalane and Corbel Brooch.
I've got both of those collected.
So 3 in each.
Yeah, exactly.
3 novellas in each. Yeah. Sounds like you're on top of things.
Yeah, I think I've got everything. And my plan is just like whatever I'm reading, I will read a Malazan book and then something else. And then a Malazan book and something else. Book and something else. So
yeah, you should be done in a few years.
Exactly. I'm thinking 2026-ish, that looks like a good year to finish. And by then the missing ones for the other bits that aren't quite completed yet, they may be all out by then. So
well, it was a project that I undertook kind of at the beginning, close to the beginning of when I started my channel. Maybe not a year in, even when I decided to do about a year, I guess, a little under a year into my BookTube channel, I decided to do this Malazan read/reread. And I just finished it a few months ago. So it did take a while. Yeah.
And that was everything.
That was everything. So prior to meeting AP, I had already started this process, and I had read Paths to Ascendancy and the Carcanus books.
Right.
And then the plan was to reread the Malazan Book of the Fallen, and along with it, read Novels of the Malazan Empire. And I did that, and also with AP, of course, and also read the Bulkalane and Corbel Brooch novellas with AP and with Ruth and Bad, actually. And we have discussions on those. So So yeah, in the course of that, I did everything. Yeah. So
I haven't gone through your complete back catalog yet. That will take a while.
Yeah, well, I have, I definitely more than any other author, I have videos on. So I've organized my playlists according to author, essentially.
Right.
And the Erickson playlist has 30 something videos in it.
Right, cool.
And then the Esslemont one also has a good chunk of videos there.
How do you find them in comparison? Because like I said, I've only read Knight of Knives.
Yeah.
And it was interesting, but I think the main thing I really got out, or the main thing that I was really into in that particular novel, was it was exposing an interesting piece of history.
Mm-hmm.
It was like, what happened? Oh, here's what happened. It was one of those hanging questions that Erickson touches on, and kind of mentions indirectly many times, but never really tells the story. Yeah. So it was interesting in that respect, but that's the only one I've read.
So that is an element of Esslemont's books that I think a reader of the Malazan Book of the Fallen would enjoy, is that a lot of, not just in Knight of Knives, but in the rest of the books in the novels of the Malazan Empire, you visit places that are just alluded to in the Malazan Book of the Fallen. Right. You find out what happens to characters who drop out of the Malazan Book of the Fallen, and you never know their fate. So if you want to know what happens to X, you have to read this novel from the novels of the Malazan Empire, that sort of thing. Yep. So there's that element, definitely, and also in Path to Ascendancy, which is the prequel series. Yeah. If you want to know how the empire was founded, there is that element to that too. As a storyteller, I love several things about Ian Esslemont, and I think it's unfair to compare him constantly to Stephen Erickson, because they happen to be writing in the same world that they developed together, by the way. And I think too often people forget that Esslemont created this world along with Stephen Erickson.
Yeah.
And he deserves full credit for that. But
I think it's just that, like, Malazan Book of the Fallen has been like the Malazan thing for the longest amount of time, and it's the most visible, so to speak.
To the degree that, and this is something I avoid saying, and I'm not trying to judge anyone for saying this, because a lot of people say it without realizing the implications, but a lot of people say the main 10, when they're referring to the Malazan Book of the Fallen. And to me, they're not the main 10. You can call them the big 10, fine. They're the big 10 if you want. But in saying the main 10 would imply that the other stuff,
the other ones are secondary somehow.
Lesser somehow, yeah. And
you pointed that out to me, and I have switched that in my head to just. I mean, saying the main 10 is like a shortcut to saying the Malazan Book of the Fallen, which is quite long. Yeah. But I will from now on be saying the Malazan Book of the Fallen, because that's what it is, and it's not main, and the other ones are not secondary or lesser. It's just, this is one series, and there are other series.
And I think people don't mean anything when they say the main necessarily.
It's just laziness.
So, but anyway, I think as a storyteller, Esslemont has tremendous talents, and he is not Stephen Erickson. And in one conversation that I had with AP and with Ian Esslemont, he even said himself, and this is not verbatim, but I think he said something to the effect that it's both fantastic, but also in a way a misfortune to be constantly compared to a genius, right? Which is Stephen Erickson is a genius, he's a brilliant writer. But in my opinion, so is Ian Esslemont. He has his own set of talents, which are different from Erickson's. I would argue that Esslemont is one of the most talented writers of atmosphere in the genre. His ability to establish an atmosphere right from the beginning is tremendous. And I think he's really, really good at it. I think that a lot of people who struggle with certain elements of Stephen Erickson's books would actually enjoy Ian Esslemont's books, would find them to be a little bit faster paced, for example. And then the thing that Esslemont does really well is action. So that's another talent of his. Some things they do actually have in common. One thing to me, and this is just my opinion, but to me, there is a kind of shared humor there that I call Malazan humor. I'm sure I'm not the first person to say that, but because they developed this world together, and because they gamed it together, and they have all these, I'm sure they had all these great moments that we all wish we had been the fly on the wall witnessing. I think they have a shared humor. And a lot of it happens with these duos in the books.
Yeah.
Whether it's Erickson or Esslemont, they're all these fantastic duos. And there's a really cool dynamic between these individuals that is often very humorous and fun. And that is something I feel like they both have, that Malazan humor. So yeah, I think those are some of the things I would characterize Esslemont's writing and with the major, statement that he's not Steven Erickson. It's just his, and even certain characters that he shares. So they for the most part, they kind of go in different realms of the Malazan world and aspects of that interconnected, group of stories. Sometimes though, there's a character that they will both write. And, so you'll get, for example, I don't think it's a spoiler to say this, but in Orb, Scepter, Throne, you get Esslemont's Kruppe, right? So his Kruppe, which is very like Erickson's Kruppe, but also it has an Esslemont spin to it. So
are you a team Kruppe?
Oh, I love Kruppe. I love Kruppe.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm definitely a team Kruppe person.
Yeah, me too. Definitely. All the Kruppe haters can go to hell.
Yeah.
Kruppe's awesome.
He is awesome. I love him.
I was very confused by him the first time he popped up.
Yeah.
Like the first time I read Gardens of the Moon all the way through, I was like, what is wrong with this person? But yeah, I learned to love Kruppe.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's true for a lot of people on Team Kruppe. It was an acquired taste. Like,
yes, Kruppe is definitely an acquired taste, or oysters, or exactly. Yeah.
Oysters.
He's also really, really interesting because he's one of the few people in the whole series, at least in the Malazan Book of the Fallen specifically, where no matter how much I've read about him, I still don't know what he is.
Yeah.
And
I don't think we will ever know.
No,
I don't think we will. Yeah.
Like Quickben sort of starts out that way, but eventually there's enough explanation that you're like, I think I kind of know what Quickben is.
Or at least parts of what Quickben is.
Yeah, we never get a full explanation, but I've got a bit of an approximation. I kind of get what he is.
Right.
And some of the exactly who and what they are. And some of the really big, powerful, like Anamanda Rake and whatever, it's actually pretty clear what they are.
Yeah.
It's pretpretty clearly explained.
There's
least
a
eventually.
depth there, but if you read Carcanus and you read the Malazan and you'll know what Anamanda Rake is.
It's not completely mysterious, but Kruppe, every time I think I've kind of got an explanation for what he is, he does something that he shouldn't be able to do.
Slippery as an eel.
Yeah, and I'm just like, is he an elder god? What is he?
Yeah.
It's just like there's no real explanation ever.
Nope, and I don't think that we'll ever have one.
No. I'm totally okay with that. I mean, that's also one of the things, like the first time I read it, I think one of the things that hooked me was I felt like Erickson respected my intelligence, that I would just figure certain things out myself. I didn't have to have them handed to me in a printout. And secondly, that just like real life, some things A, are never explained, and B, just don't make sense.
Yep.
Because I don't have enough information, and that's fine. Like for me anyway, I think it's one of the big objections a lot of people have, like when people talk about hard magic systems. like every hard magic system I've ever run into, like really hard, like Sanderson, I kind of bounced off of it because I was like, I'm not playing D&D. I don't want a rule book handed to me. I'm reading a story, and magic is mysterious weirdness.
Yeah.
And
Well,
I'm
so what you're
totally
talking
cool.
about is certainty, or being comfortable with uncertainty,
Yeah.
which definitely I think Steven Erickson is a huge advocate for being uncomfortable with uncertainty. In fact, you could argue that complete certainty is a very frightening thing.
I think there's even a quote somewhere.
Something to that effect. Yeah.
Yeah.
Erickson has said something. Maybe I might have just quoted him word for word there. But
I think it's actually a quote in the books somewhere.
Yeah.
That, you know, you shouldn't trust anyone who's certain, or something like that. You know.
Yeah, or that certainty is frightening.
Or that certainty is, yeah.
So yeah, and that is something that he kind of lives with the books by, you know, there are some ends that don't get tied up. There are loose ends in the Malazan Book of the Fallen. And that's just another thing that sometimes upsets people. Like, no, I want to know what happens to this character, and why don't I get a perfect resolution to this arc, and that sort of thing. I mean, you get enough of that. I think he does give you plenty of resolution.
Yeah. But there's a lot of openness as well.
Yeah, which is kind of like life. And I also feel like that's the way he treats characters, which are, I felt so connected to these characters, so immersed in their stories. But I also felt that they are more or less like my experience of people in the world, which is that no one of us is actually more important than the others, right? And I'm not the hero who's going to save the universe. I'm just a guy who is trying to figure things out like everybody else, and I'm not more special or better than anyone. So
I'm disappointed. I've actually been depending on Herr Professor Dr. Fantasy to save the universe.
I'm working on it. I haven't given up.
What's the universe going to do if you're not going to save it?
I imagine it'll just keep doing its thing.
Okay. All right. Yeah, I guess we'll just have to wait and see.
But it is a series that the vastness of that series is something that I think gives me the proper perspective on my place in the universe, right?
Yeah. That like nobody is safe, and nobody is really actually the chosen one.
Right.
Like every chosen one that comes up, there are chosen ones, of course, but every chosen one that comes up is really just a tool. And I don't mean tool as in the insulting way that we say in Australia, but like they're being used by someone.
Yeah.
And that's the way in which they're chosen. They're not the mystical chosen one who's going to save the universe and be the singular hero. Yeah. And even the smallest unchosen ones can make a huge difference.
Yeah.
Sometimes by just being in the wrong place at the right time, or the other way around.
Exactly right. Exactly. It's really I think when you think of Malazan, you often think of the most memorable, dear characters are us ordinary mortals, the ones who are struggling alongside the elder gods and the ascendants and all of that. Yeah, and that's a very Dune kind of theme too, and it's a theme
totally.
You have in. I'm reading R. Scott Baker's. I just read the Darkness That Comes Before, and I feel like he's going to be playing with this sort of thing as well.
I want to read those, but I don't think, considering the reading plan I'm committed to, I don't think putting a Baker book in between Malazan books is a good idea for my brain. I think that would be a bit too much. I think the next book
I put off Baker until after I finish Malazan.
Yeah. I don't think mixing them is probably a great idea. They sound like great and right up my alley.
Yeah.
But I think after House of Chains, I'm going to read a Discworld novel. Like
good
total
choice.
Change of pace.
Yeah. What's worked well for me is Discworld or Dresden Files, or something like
Dresden Files. I've read all of them, I think, except the newest 4. I had a phase where I had all of them on my Kindle, and every day when I went to lunch at work, I just read Dresden. in the train to work. I read Dresden, and they're easy, they're quick, and I just bang, 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 bang. It just flew through like 10 or 12 or something of them in a few months.
Yep. But yeah, I totally hear you about that. I waited till I finished Malazan to start the Prince of Nothing trilogy, and then, or I may eventually read the second Apocalypse series, that's the beginning of, I guess. And then the one I'm saving for after that is going to be Gene Wolfe. So I think I'm going to read the Book of the New Sun after I finish the Prince of Nothing trilogy. That's what I think I'm going to do.
Okay.
But I don't want to read all that at once, So.
I will, like, this is probably way, way, way in advance planning.
Yeah.
But I've been wanting to reread the Book of the New Sun.
Ah, okay. Yeah.
I've read it twice already. And
okay, you have. Okay.
I would like to read
like it then because you reread it.
I did. Yeah. I would be honored to read it with you, but I would especially love to read it with someone who is smarter about literature than I am, and you definitely are. Or at least has a different kind of lens that you're looking through. Yeah.
That's a better way to put it.
Yeah. I think it would be extremely educational. It's a book where I constantly, the first time I read it, I was a teenager, and that was a mistake. And then I read it sometime in my 30s, I think. And it's a book that, in a way, constantly made me feel maybe a little stupid. Because I had a feeling that there was always more there. There was symbolism there, and I just wasn't quite getting it. There were references to things there, and I just wasn't quite getting it. I did get a lot out of it, obviously, because I bothered to read it twice.
Yeah.
But it's a book with a lot of depth. So let's do a buddy read when you get to it. I've got it on my shelf over there.
Cool. Yeah, probably it'll be early next year is what I'm guessing.
Early 2023.
2023. Yeah.
Oh, okay. Cool. Yeah.
Early-ish. Yeah.
I'm
always more optimistic than I should be about when I'm going to get to these things. So when I say
I've noticed that.
Yeah.
I've noticed that from your TBR videos, but it's cute and I can relate.
Yeah.
I also, my Oztober plan, I was going to read 4, maybe 5 Australian books. I was taking a break from the Malazan thing, and I was reading only Australian authors, and I'm a little disappointed in my performance. I read The Counselor, and I did a review of it, and that was awesome. I loved it.
Good.
I DNF'd the next book.
Oops.
Yeah, and I'm still not sure why exactly. Just that I noticed that I was just not as engaged as I would have liked to have been. And like, sometimes you're like, oh, I can't wait to sit down again and get into the, I didn't have that feeling.
All right, cool. So we were just talking about Australian writers and your efforts to read them. And were there others that you actually did get to besides the one?
Yeah, actually, I mean, one thing I guess I can be proud of is I've read the first book in the Licanius trilogy. And Licanius is some chunky books. So
that author is Australian?
Yeah, James Islington. Yeah.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I didn't realize that. Okay.
Yeah, he lives in Victoria, so somewhere in or near Melbourne, I think. Yeah.
Okay. So yeah, I wanted to ask you then, well, who are the Australian fantasy writers that I should be reading? It sounds like you named a couple right there.
Yeah, I mean, it's her debut, or actually, I think it's there. I think there's a gender non-binary thing going on with them. It's E.J. Beaton.
Okay.
And they are now writing under the name Elise John Beaton, actually.
Okay.
I think it was one of those, female or non-binary authors writing with initials, so that it's, it's unclear. So the first book is published as E.J. Beaton.
Okay, cool.
It's called The Counselor, and it's the first in a duology. And it's it's pretty good, and it deals with some gender issues, which is quite interesting. It deals with a lot of themes of the haves and the have-nots, differences in class. It's got a mysterious magic system, so it's not getting into, you know, if you have this and you have this and you put them together, you can make this kind of, you know, it's still fun and mysterious, kind of based on the elements.
Soft magic, yeah.
Yeah, it's much more of a soft magic system, and it's basically the story of a woman who has to become a leader. And in a and the society is quite interesting. Like there's no, this is also one of the things I loved about Erickson. It's like the world he writes is gender indifferent, I guess you can say. You know, there are men who treat women badly, but there are women who treat men badly, and there are no explicit expected gender roles. And that's the same in the counselor. Like and also sexuality is also very open. Like people sleep with whoever they want to sleep with, and it's not expected that it's a hetero relationship or anything like that.
Yeah.
So that was an interesting book. The Shadow of What Was Lost was an interesting book. I think it was probably, I think the way I feel about it is probably that it was very much a setup novel, because it's a trilogy.
Yeah. It's hard to avoid that in a book one. It really is. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, there is a lot to set up, and there's obviously a big world and lots of interesting history and different stories going on and that kind of thing. I wasn't crazy about the book, but I liked it enough that I will keep going.
Okay. But have you read, I think Trudy Canavan is an Australian author, right?
I believe she is. I don't think I've ever read anything by her.
Okay. No relation to the Nemesis that we know of.
That's good for her.
Yeah. So, but yeah, I haven't read her either yet. But
no. And there's Garth Nix that I've heard of, but I think most of Garth Nix's stuff is also kind of YA, I think.
I haven't read anything by Garth Nix yet.
No. There's also, this was also on my list for Oztober, but I didn't get to it, is Empire of the Vampire by Jay Kristoff. Jay Kristoff is definitely an Aussie.
Okay. Well, he's been that's been a lot of people excited about that one. Yeah.
It's I've heard mixed things. I've heard mostly good things, but I haven't gotten to it yet. So
I haven't either.
Yeah, I'm not sure. It's good. It's good. I'm very happy that someone wrote something about vampires where they're not sparkly.
I think that's the consensus. Like Mike from Mike's book reviews was very happy about that.
Yeah. I mean, to me, vampires, like as a reader who is a human, not a vampire, you should feel about vampires the way that a sheep feels about wolves. You know, like they
that's a sexy sheep. Yeah.
No, exactly. Sheep should not be having sexual fantasies about wolves.
Right.
That just seems weird to me. We are food. You know, that's our relationship to vampires. We are food.
Yeah.
And it sounds like it's gotten a bit more back to the vampires or monsters roots.
Yeah.
With Empire of the Vampire.
Although it's curious because you do have, from the very inception of, I think, vampire stories, this dual fascination with mortality and sex, right? I mean, that's there from the beginning. And most storytelling is about death and sex, one or the other or both. But vampires are this really curious monster.
Vampires are death sex.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, in Dracula, if I remember, it's been a while since I read Dracula, but in Dracula, that was also kind of there, at least as much as it could be in the kind of in the time period.
Big time, yeah.
But if I remember correctly, it was always kind of presented as like a power that Dracula had to fascinate other people,
right?
And not as like sane, uninfluenced humans looking at him and thinking, wow, you know, he's pretty sexy because he sucks people's blood.
Right.
You know, it seemed more like it was just like his power to lure somebody else.
Yeah.
Felt maybe sexual.
Right.
You know.
Well, it's sexualized. Let's put it that way. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. But yeah, not so much, you know, I'm a teenage girl and I'm in love with a vampire because vampires are just sexy.
And sparkly.
Like, and sparkly. Yeah. I haven't read those books, so I don't want to openly diss them. But everything I've heard about them, I'm like, why are they sparkly? What do you mean sparkly?
I don't know. I haven't read them either, so I shouldn't sound like a snob.
Yeah, no, I mean they obviously were popular with a certain target audience, which is definitely not us.
You mean old dudes over 50? That's not the target audience for.
I'm pretty sure it wasn't.
Yeah,
I don't know. I haven't read them, so maybe I'm wrong. But it sounded a bit more like a prepubescent girl kind of thing. I don't know.
Might be.
Yeah, I'm not sure. Have your daughters read them?
Or did you forbid them? I think they have, although maybe they wouldn't want me to publicly admit that, but I just did. So too bad.
I think it puts them in good company because like there are a lot of girls their age, I think, who have.
Yeah.
So
yeah. Well, yeah, I'm not 100% sure, but I think they have read those books. Yeah. So
yeah, it's always interesting when I open up a book and there's a coming of age story. And I'm always like, did I mistakenly pick up a YA book? You know, and very like Faithful and the Fallen, Malice.
Sure.
One of the main characters is very much a coming of age story.
Yeah, kind of like farm boy gets
exactly
out into the world kind of thing. Yeah, sure.
Exactly. And I was kind of like, I'm definitely not the target audience for a YA story, but it was pretty clear that it's not. Right.
I would not call it YA at all.
No.
But it's an interesting point because this is another artificial division we've made now. And YA is a very recent genre distinction. I think Harry Potter had a lot to do with the creation of the YA designation there. You know, Ursula Le Guin's Earthsea books were supposedly for children. And I have taught A Wizard of Earthsea in my college level class, and people struggle with it in there. So, I mean,
I would not give Earthsea to children.
I mean, it's interesting how these things change over time, what is considered to be for children and what's not. But the whole designation YA is very, very, I think, I get why it exists because people want to easily identify, I like this, so I probably would like this kind of thing.
Yeah.
But it's problematic at the same time because, you know, nobody has a line you draw and says, this is YA and this is not. And I think it's also been problematic because there's been, I think it's fair to say, a sort of gender component to it as well, where a lot of women authors who write fantasy have been lumped into the YA label. And so, yeah, I mean, it's kind of a...
And YA generally isn't actually YA, it's YW. Right? I mean, what they're marketing YA towards is young women, generally. Not only, but
often, I think...
more than, I think, young men.
Probably true. That is probably true in the minds of the people who are doing the marketing, I think.
Yeah.
At the same time, you know, it's an interesting question.
I mean, Harry Potter is certainly not for only girls or only boys.
Right.
But a lot of the things like that are stereotypical YA, with all of the romance stuff and love triangles, and, you know, that kind of stuff, is surely interesting to some teenage boys, but not most.
Yeah, it's interesting. But again, I think you get into the why this distinction where you have coming of age stories of boys are often not even talked about or marketed as YA, whereas coming of age stories about a girl are most often labeled YA. And to me, maybe there is some meaningful somewhere, although you can't, it's not a hard and fast thing, but I think there's a level of, to me, the more important distinction is the level of complexity in the story.
Yeah.
And there are certainly some younger people who are ready for very complex storytelling, but for the most part, I think that's not the case. When I was a teenager, I wasn't ready for certain books that I now feel much more ready for, because I've had more experience and that sort of thing. So it's not a matter of intelligence so much as experience. And so there's, I think, some maybe meaningful distinction to be made for this is a book that is written for a person who has this level of experience so far in their lives, and so there's a certain amount of complexity in this book, and would be a book that would be a good reading experience for somebody with this amount of experience. So
but usually when I see booktubers talking about YA, they're talking about the tropes.
Yes.
They're not necessarily talking about the writing complexity or that kind of stuff. They're talking much more about like, there's a teenage romance in it, so it's YA, or and I mean, like Malice is a good example. There is a coming of age story, but it's only one of many different stories.
Right.
And there's enough going on, and it's written in a complex enough way that I wouldn't call it YA. Most of the characters in the entire thing are adults. There happens to be one main character who is quite young. But it's not so much. I certainly wouldn't call it a YA story.
And because, well, I can't say that because it might be spoilery, I guess, but in Malice anyway, there's no heavy emphasis on the romance element in there either. So that also for many would indicate that it's, again, because this is a very gendered thing, indicate that it's not YA, I suppose.
Yeah.
So it's ultimately probably a meaningless distinction, but humans seem to do that all the time, right? We want to classify everything. So
it's just like science fiction and fantasy. Like there are certainly some books you can say this is definitely simply science fiction, and there's not really much to argue about. And fantasy, but then there's other ones like I actually started an argument recently about Dune.
Okay, good.
Because I was like, somebody was like, well, Dune is definitely science fiction. And I was like, well, yeah, I mean, it's science fiction with magic. Basically.
Ooh, them's fighting words right there.
Yeah. And Star Wars. I mean, there are also people who will die on the hill that Star Wars is science fiction. I'm like, it is, but with magic.
Right. Science fantasy.
So is it just science fiction? Like, can it be science fiction if it's got magic in it? Or at least can it be only science fiction if it's got magic in it?
Yeah.
I don't know. But it's a good book. That's the main thing.
That is the main thing. That is the main thing. We are here to celebrate good books, good storytelling, and maybe get into the occasional fun argument.
As long as they're fun arguments.
Yes. Yeah. Matt, this has been a tremendous pleasure. Speaking of fun, this has been a lot of fun for me chatting with you and getting to know you a little bit better. And I'm going to totally take you up on the Gene Wolfe read, Book of the New Sun. We're going to do that. And I look forward to chatting about Book of the New Sun with you at some point next year. And I will give you fair warning when I'm about to do that. So
and we've also got the Tori and I from Tori Talks.
Yes.
We wanna because we were talking about military fantasy. And I remembered that you had recommended, I think it was you, that you had recommended The Things They Carried.
By Tim O'Brien.
Tim O'Brien, which is a story about Vietnam and soldiers.
He's a Vietnam War veteran himself.
Exactly. And so is Glenn Cook. So we were going to read The Things They Carried and then have a chat with you, which I think we need to schedule something, but maybe in January.
Yeah, January would work for me.
Yeah. And then we're going to read The Black Company together as well. The first book, at least.
Cool. You and Tori are going to be reading Black Company.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, we're going to read both of those one after the other, and then have a chat with you, and maybe a chat with Alan about Black Company.
Oh, Alan is the guy. Yeah,
exactly. That's why he's the guy that we want to do it with.
Yeah.
But yeah, Book of the New Sun is definitely on my reread list. So let's buddy read that together next year. That would be awesome.
Sounds like a plan. All right. Well, thank you very much.
Thank you so much for the invite. I've also had a great time and really enjoyed getting to know you better. I'm happy to come on the channel anytime.
Great. Good. And I will have a link to everybody, Matt's channel, Matt on Books, in the description. Go and check out his channel, his cool content, especially that one video with me in it. Sorry.
That is the best video I've done, no question. Hands down.
It? Okay.
Yeah.
Well, I don't know about that, but
well, because it's got you and AP
and Josh. Yeah. So
but like the nemesis battle to end all nemesis battles. So
yes.
And me and Josh on the sidelines.
Fireballs were cast.
Yes.
Discussion, I believe.
Exactly.
My tweet is still having the scorch marks
still smoking off.
Yeah. So anyway, thank you so much, Matt, and everybody. Likewise. Go check out his channel, Matt on Books, and everybody till next time.